the political system in America is now pitting men against women and women against men. And that's the biggest story of this election.
Hello and welcome to the Americano show. I'm your guest host, Kate Andrews, and the tables have turned because our guest is your host, Freddy Gray, the deputy editor of The Spectator. Freddy, hi.
Hello. I'm a huge fan of this show, so it's great to be on. Long-time listener.
Yeah. Freddy, you've just landed in Florida.
Yeah.
You've been traveling the U.S. You're in Florida for Election Day and going into the evening when we'll start to get some results. Tell us what you're seeing.
Well, the truth is that everybody's gone mad in America.
Fantastic.
People are in a state of sort of nervous exhaustion, and not just the politicos and the journos. I think everybody just wants this election to be over. There's been so much drama, so much tension, and so much talk of how much is at stake. If you talk to sort of people outside of political bubbles, they seem to be saying, we'll still be the United States. Let's not make this into this existential election that the political class want it to be. So that's the sort of the mood of the people I've been speaking to. In terms of sort of insider political talk, nobody has a clue. You talk to Republicans, they're getting pretty excited about some things, the mail vote being one. And there's a little bit of concern in Republican circles about, as one put it to me earlier, that they've had 4 years to improve their cheating ground game, meaning that the Democrats have found ways of slowballing the election in counties that they want to slowball the election in. That's not necessarily conspiracy talk. It is true that the Democrats have had quite a lot of say over delaying the counts in certain states like Nevada and areas of Pennsylvania too.
Fred, on that point, a video has come out of the former president saying that he is prepared to accept an election result where he loses if he thinks it is a fair election. I guess this raises the question, does Donald Trump think there can be a fair election where he loses? And what's your sense, speaking to Republican operatives and people who are close to the campaign, what are both teams thinking in the hours after the polls close?
Everybody in Republican circles thinks that the Democrats will sort of cheat or at least sort of stretch the rules as much as they can. So therefore, I think if this race is very tight, which it looks like it will be, and if Donald Trump loses, there will be acrimony. I think possibly Trump will surprise on the upside by thinking, do I want another 4 years? I'm 78 years old. Do I want another 4 years of fighting an election? And he might decide not to. But I think there will be a lot of anger and concern. And you've got Elon Musk with Twitter, who will be highlighting any irregularities in any county or district. The thing to remember about an American presidential election is it's not one presidential election. It's 50 presidential elections all on the same day. And they all have their different processes and procedures. And so if it's very, very tight, it gets very, very messy. And there's nothing that anyone can do about that.
And Fred, should we be expecting a very long night and potentially some long days ahead? There is still, of course, the chance that there will be a decisive victory within maybe 5-6 hours. But it sounds like the people you've been speaking to suggest prepare for a much longer event.
I think everybody who claims to be an insider or is an insider is saying it's going to take a long time. I am praying for a quick result, just because otherwise it's going to be an all-nighter for the whole Spectator team.
That's really kind of
you.
But
I think it's going to be an all-nighter anyway, probably. It is possible. I think there'll be things to look out for. So I think polls close at 9 p.m. Eastern, which, forgive me, is I think around 3 for you, 3 a.m. for you.
It's early morning. So, it's going to be 1 to 3 a.m.
So we should know polls in Georgia and North Carolina, which are obviously two very important swing states. So those will be the two ones to really look out for. And if Trump establishes an early lead there, that's going to look like a Trump victory. And the general mood seems to be, there's often been this talk of Trump winning the Rust Belt and then losing the Sun Belt. At the moment, and it seems to flip depending on who you're talking to, but at the moment, the consensus seems to be Trump is doing pretty well in the South. The big danger is that Harris wins Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. And if she wins those, she wins 270 electoral college votes and the presidency.
Freddie, let's talk about some of the closing messages that we're seeing. They're curious, to say the least, despite pulling in the Democratic circles that talking about Trump and the Republicans as fascist and as dangerous is not the most convincing strategy to get out the vote. We're seeing a lot of that from those in Democratic circles supporting Kamala Harris. And then on the flip side, you had a very curious tweet from Elon Musk just a couple hours ago talking about how the cavalry was coming, how the young men were turning up because they know what's at stake. I just thought to myself that there are going to be women voting for Donald Trump. What exactly is being achieved with the messages on both sides?
Well, this is exactly why, Kate, this election is the great divider of the sexes, because you read that tweet and thought, oh, that's a bit gross and weird. I read that tweet and thought, yeah, the male cavalry are coming.
Finally.
Not because I'm a huge Trump fan, I'm just a sexist pig. But this is the thing. I mean, the political system in America is now pitting men against women and women against men. And that is that's the biggest story of this election. I think the biggest, clearest story we have at the moment is that if the Harris campaign win what they hope they might win, which is up to 54%, up to 54% of the electorate are women, they will win this election. And if men vote in larger numbers than normal, the Trump side will win the election. So this is a battle of the sexes. And, Trump went on, has his last rally in Pennsylvania last night. He was so proud of Joe Rogan's endorsement. Joe Rogan has a hugely male-skewed audience, 80% male audience. And then on the flip side, Kamala Harris obviously has made abortion a huge part of her campaign. And one of her closing adverts, I think we saw it in the office last week, Kate, was Julia Roberts encouraging women to lie to their husbands about how they voted, but in a sort of cheeky, fun way.
You did quickly show that one to me. Yeah, I had missed it. It's remarkable. Earlier in the week, Megan McArdle from the Washington Post and I were talking about how truly awful that ad is. I mean, the implication is domestic abuse is the underlying point of that ad. And it's not to say that it doesn't exist. It does, but to almost suggest that the average voter is dealing with that kind of situation and can't be honest with their partner about how they vote. I mean, it is truly remarkable messaging.
And as Dan McCarthy put it in an Americano I did with him yesterday, the Democrats are well known for going after all the institutions. They're now going after marriage as an institution and encouraging people to lie to their spouses. So I mean, it really is very cynical at best and pretty darn awful at worst, I think.
But it's interesting to me, Fred, because yes, you're completely right. I saw that tweet and I thought it was really quite odd indeed. Maybe I'm being very snowflakey, but it does seem to me, just somewhat objectively here, that the camps are trying to keep the men and women apart. I mean, the Julia Roberts ad is really to suggest that it's women versus the men, that the men are somehow going to be dangerous or horrible to you, depending on how you vote. And then the tweet today from the Republican camp, it's like the ladies, they don't exist. They're not a part of this movement that may put Trump back in the White House. I mean, they're not being nuanced about it.
Well, I hear you. I would say that just on the gender war, I would say that the Trump campaign have been less, but this is because I'm an unbiased man. So you've got to take everything I say with a pinch of salt. But the Trump campaign have been more open to, femininity as a concept than the Harris campaign has been about masculinity, because the dudes for Harris, white dudes for Harris, and so on, they only talked about their support for Harris in the context of being a feminist. And so it's very much, it is gender wars. And as I say, I think this is the defining issue of this election.
Well, let's talk about what you're hearing from voters as you move around America, Fred. What are they telling you the top issues are? Are they talking about the economy and inflation and abortion, or are they talking about things that perhaps haven't been fully captured by the media and indeed by pollsters who still cannot call this election?
I think cost of living is a huge issue, and it remains so. And Donald Trump, when he launched his campaign in 2022, said something quite interesting. It was just after the midterms when the Republicans were expected to do very well as a result of inflation, because of anger at Bidenflation. And they didn't do quite as well as expected. And Trump, in his when he announced his campaign, said, Americans aren't quite feeling the pain of inflation yet, but they will. And if he wins this election, I think that will be a validation of what he meant there. Because certainly I've spoken to quite a few people who say, and particularly people, I mean, I've been in New York, DC, and now here. People say if you get out of the cities and you go to smaller towns where suddenly, your groceries are, or increasingly your groceries are getting inaffordably expensive. That's where there's real anger about the economy, and that's where it will really hurt the Democrats in a way that perhaps it didn't 2 years ago.
So you've just come down to Florida, Fred. You're going to be spending tonight at a Trump gathering. It's not necessarily a victory party. It's not necessarily a commiserations party, because you've said before that Donald Trump is quite superstitious. He doesn't like to give it those names. No,
he's very superstitious about sort of talking as though he's won when he hasn't. But at the same time, he does make it clear that he thinks he's going to win. But I think he's very superstitious about winning parties and things like that. So there is this party in Mar-a-Lago. I think there's going to be a sort of very tight circle around there. I haven't got into that, I'm ashamed to say. But I am going to the campaign watch night party, which is not far away, and Trump will probably make an appearance there. Certainly make an appearance there if he wins. If he loses, or if we don't know, who knows what he'll do.
And Fred, you mentioned that you're going to be looking out for North Carolina and Georgia very early. Pennsylvania obviously will be high on that list too. It seems still to be the key swing state. But I guess the question is, if it is just so close, we could be looking at recounts. We could be looking at not knowing the result for quite some time. What is the impact on all of this when it comes to American democracy? To leave the breathing room for ideas and concerns and conspiracies to percolate seems to me to be a real risk this election.
Yeah, I don't know how long America can keep going having elections that half the country don't believe are valid. And I think that will be the case. Whoever wins tonight is you will have, I mean, certainly on the Republican side, I think there will be a sense that it was cheating, it was stolen. On the Democratic side, if it's a clear win for Trump, I think there may be some acceptance in Democratic circles. I think there are a few Democrats who are looking at their party and thinking, we can't really go on like this. They shoehorned Kamala Harris in without any, democratic process. Joe Biden himself was sort of propped up for 4 years with everybody pretending that he was a fully functioning president when he wasn't. I think there will be some acceptance in Democratic circles that they need to change, and it's not just the elections. I think on the Republican side, I think there will be increasing rage about the election process and despair, really, that they, despite warning that the Democrats were going to rob them of a rightful win for ages, that they were unable to stop it happening.
Well, if Donald Trump loses, this will really be the third time that the electorate has rejected him, if you include the 2022 midterms. It does seem, Fred, that whichever camp loses, whichever party loses, they have to have a fundamental rethink about the ideas in the party, the philosophy behind it, the public policy they're putting forward, the way they're appealing to voters. Is there any chance of that actually happening, though? I mean, I think the same thing was said after the 2020 election with the Republican Party, and one might say that MAGA has come back stronger than ever, even if Trump loses. It seems to dominate the party even more.
I think you're probably, if you want America to go back towards the center, you're probably out of luck, because I think the Democrats will look at Harris's campaign and say she pushed far too hard towards the center. She tried to present herself as a moderate. She, hung out with Liz Cheney and all that sort of stuff. That's not where the progressive base is. That's not where the energy on the American left is. And ditto Trump, I think. A lot of people will say, within the Republican circles, would say he wasn't really MAGA enough. I think that'll be harder to do with Trump, but there will be a bit of that. And so I think, no, there's not going to be any sort of going back to politics as normal. But I think there will be a sense among both parties that the era of Trump is probably, if he loses, it's over. Both parties will go in different directions.
This is why I just struggle to believe that the polls are as close as they are. I'm not challenging that. The experts know a lot better than I do. But we really are being presented in America with two fundamentally different pathways. Because in 2020, Joe Biden's message was, I'm going to try to calm things down and return things to normal. As it happens, I don't think he was successful at doing that. I'm not completely convinced he ever really tried to do that. But that isn't Harris's message this time around. The language is notably different. She presents as a continuity candidate with Joe Biden, but Joe Biden was more progressive than he campaigned. He moved things more to the left than he said he was going to do. She implies that that's probably going to go a step further, although she refuses to be specific. Donald Trump, the MAGA movement, all that's been going on for the past 8 years speaks for itself. But we actually don't really have a candidate in this election saying, I'm going to go back to basics. We have both candidates saying, don't choose the other person. They're dangerous. They're bad. But you don't have that pitch for centrism, which is actually quite different from 2020.
Well, yes, and I think, 2020 was a very odd election because of the pandemic. But I would say generally there's been very little talk of policy. There was talk about how there wasn't a talk of policy. There was a lot of that. So a lot of kind of saying to Kamala Harris, what are your policies? What are your policies? And then she produced some policies which were just sort of vague and flammy. And Donald Trump has had an agenda all along. There's an Agenda 47 that anyone can look up. But I think that it hasn't been, other than immigration, healthcare has not really factored very much in this election. It's normally a major issue in American elections. It's not been about issues. It's been a Trump referendum again, as we've been saying a lot in the last few years. And this is the other problem for a lot of analysts in the next few hours, is there is nothing left to say about Donald Trump.
And I won't make you, Fred. I guess I'll just end by asking you a question about Kamala Harris and her team from those you've been speaking to. As you said, Trump is suggesting he's confident. Do you think the Harris team is also suggesting confidence?
I think they felt excited about what happened in the last week. They thought that the Madison Square Trump rally backfired with that joke about Puerto Rico and garbage and so on. And they feel confident that there was some backlash to that, and the independents who probably were just beginning to warm up to Trump was suddenly recoiled a little bit and remembered the reasons why they don't like Donald Trump. There may be some truth in that, but then you talk to Trump people and they say, look, independents are breaking the other way. She's putting them off. So there's no real certainty about where independents are going, or indeed how many actual swinging independents there are. Who has not made up their mind about Donald Trump by now? Not very many. And it does seem the only people publicly saying, I used to be an independent and now I'm voting for Donald Trump. And now I'm voting for one of the candidates, are the people who are saying that they'll vote for Donald Trump.
Fred, we're going to speak to you again in a couple of hours. You're going to be at the Trump party. We're going to be speaking to Amber Duke in Michigan and Matt McDonald in Washington, D.C. That's going to be very chaotic and very fun. And whilst we won't have any results, we may well have a lot more information to update our watchers and listeners with. Have fun in Florida. Keep us posted, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks, Kate.
Thanks, Fred.